Hello and welcome to another episode of the Leadmore podcast. I'm your host, John T. Meyer. The Leadmore podcast is the show where we sit down with leaders of today to help inspire and create more leaders for tomorrow. As you know, I believe the world needs more leaders, and I also believe that you are one of them. Whether you're currently leading or desire to lead at some point, someone's going to hand you the baton, and it's going to be time for you to step up and lead. And if they don't, then you can do it now. Because guess what? You don't have to wait to take that baton. You can create that business. You can lead, coach that team. You can start that nonprofit. You can go up to another leader and say, can I help you? Right? And we need more leaders. So I'm begging you, I'm urging you to do that in whatever stage of the game you are at. And that's a perfect segue to today's episode. Depending on the stage of the game you are at, I sat down with a good friend who also happens to be my aunt, Becky Blue. Becky Blue lives here in the Sioux Falls, Brandon area. And recently, a couple of years ago, but has recently released a new version of her book called Turning. You can see it here on video. Turning is the magic and mystery of more days. This book is about, kind of on the surface, about aging. But if you dive deeper into it, the book is really about changing our perspective, not just turning 60, which is when Becky wrote this book, but turning our orientation outward by, instead of looking down and in at ourselves as the project or ourselves as what's best for us, she encourages us to look out and up. What can happen by turning our gaze outward to serve others, to help others, and to make a difference? And to me, that is leadership, right? So this book may not be about leadership. Our conversation may not even use the word leadership. But to me, the idea, the concept of turning outward and orienting ourselves toward others, servant leaders, that's leadership, right? And so I love this conversation to catch up, of course, with someone I've known a long time, who's known me from the beginning of my life, who just has a lot to say. And has a way with words, as you'll see in this conversation here with Becky Blue. All right. Welcome to another episode of the Leadmore podcast. I'm really excited today to have not only a friend, but a family member, my aunt, Becky Blue. How are you, Becky?
Hey, John. One of my favorite nephews. How are you today?
I'm doing well.
Is there one? Yeah.
One of. I'm excited to have you on the show, not to talk about, family Christmas planning or the Johnson gift exchange. We can talk about your book here, Turning, a book that you wrote and released this year, I guess, right? Was it kind of officially this year you started the promotion of the book?
This year I turned it into a hardcover. And so I'm getting a little more, I'm trying to go outside the 605 this year with my book. But I actually wrote it during the pandemic, and it got published in, I think, at the end of 2022 as a paperback.
Okay. It has been a couple of years. Okay. And didn't you write it, is it right to say, was it during your 60th birthday? Is that when you started writing it? Or
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. It was in my way of kind of dealing with turning 60. Yeah.
Yeah. So the book is called Turning, and the subtitle, The Magic and Mystery of More Days. And I wanted to start out with, I was like, I have not written a book, but it's on my bucket list. And you've written a couple. So when you were writing this book, who were you sort of thinking about? Who were you writing it for?
I suppose I was writing it for myself, as I just indicated, but I think was also writing it for all my friends, other people who were turning 60, who kind of, for better or for worse, kind of were maybe freaking out a little bit. And I thought, okay, I'm a geriatric nurse by trade. I should be able to record in real time what's happening to me. But I think now, as I look back on it, I've been so blessed to meet so many people who've read it. So people who are 20 years younger than 60 or who are 20 years older than 60. So even though I focused on that one number, it's still a much broader audience.
And don't you think, I mean, the joke, of course, is like 60 is the new 50 or the new 40, like, but Paige and I also often joke, because I'll turn 40 next year, I recall vividly my parents' 40th birthday and the black balloons and the over the hill and all these things that to me at 39 just seem so out of touch. Do you feel like aging has changed in society, or the way we look at the way people, acquire more days?
Yes. I do think we've come a long way. So if that, I know your parents well, and so that would have been 30 years ago.
Yeah.
And so I think even when I turned 40, it was actually, it wasn't the black balloons. It was a girlfriend who did a whole Barbie theme, because I do happen to be born the same year as Barbie, 1959.
Nice. There you go.
But I digress. But anyway, yeah, I think society has come a ways, maybe in our celebrations. But I think really internally, how we look at those big milestone birthdays, it can still be a little freaky for people. And my goal, really, my big goal in life now at this point, is to change the culture of aging. So I really want people to look at it in a much more positive aspect, and to not be afraid of what's coming.
Yeah. And how much of that do you think is more mental perception, and how much there also seems to be a health angle, because people are living longer than they used to. And we hear from the health wellness community, they talk about longevity and not only having more days, but having sort of quality days. But I think you've thought about it more from the mentality aspect, don't you think?
Yeah, I think it's a lot about mindset, and I think that's where you have to start. In fact, now I'm kind of working into this new concept. A couple weeks ago, when we were driving across Wyoming after having been in California, and I was looking out over the plains, and I thought, oh my gosh, think of Lewis and Clark and the Mormons and their hand carts. And I mean, how crazy it would be to go across Wyoming in that kind of environment that many years ago, and to just keep pushing. And so I started on looking into an explorer's mindset. And maybe as an entrepreneur, maybe you've looked at the explorer's mindset. But what I found was an explorer's mindset is kind of been used for young people, like how do you approach the unknown, or start a new business, or discover some new concept. But how do you do that as an older person? And so I'm kind of developing that right now, as like aging. How do you approach aging with an explorer's mindset? And I think that would be a really good
sequel,
right, to turning. I mean, the idea of kind of turning outside yourself and looking at what the world needs, but then turning, but with an explorer's mindset.
Yeah. And I wonder if, we have so many maybe preconceived notions about aging, right? Because we hear about it our whole life, and we see it from our parents and family members and loved ones. And it's, maybe this is similar to explorer's mindset, but that idea of like a beginner's mindset, or like a first principles, you go back to the like fresh eyes. So that's really interesting. I mean, I think you certainly embodied the point of this book, which is, you decided to become an author in your 60s. I know you've given a TED talk about this topic. Like, how did you feel like you had to really push yourself to embark on these new challenges, or was that just naturally? Did you always think you would write a book, I guess?
I always hoped I would write a book. I've always liked writing. And luckily in my work as a nurse, I got to do a lot of writing through my grant writing work that I did at my job as a clinical nurse specialist. One thing I know about myself, and we're probably kind of cut from the same cloth here, is that I like things when they're new. And I get bored pretty quickly. And I had a wonderful mentor who explained a couple things to me once about me. She said, Becky, I think you like things when you're new. And Becky, I think you like to have big playgrounds, which was great. I'm more of a breadth person than a depth person. And so I always knew that I'd want to use my background in nursing and my background in faith community nursing specifically to still keep working, however it be maybe a little bit leisurely, into my third act of life. And writing a book was a really great way to do that.
Yeah, that's great. I love that idea. Have you read the Unreasonable Hospitality? I haven't got to talk to you if you've read that book or not, but
no, you gave it to me, but I haven't yet. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. It feels like it should be required reading for your team. But in the book, Will Gadara, he's this restaurateur, and he mentions that his dad has this line of, he thinks the secret to happiness is always having something new to look forward to, or something to look forward to. And maybe that's part of why some people struggle with aging, is there are less things to look forward to, or maybe milestones ahead. Or do you think that might be true?
Yeah. And I think about, when you look at kind of, especially even for women, kind of the last couple of decades that we've come through, so much of our identity is, and for men certainly, is based in our careers or what we choose as our job. And so I like to remind people about that your identity is not in your work. For me, because I'm a person of faith, my identity is as a child of God. And what is my calling? How can I make the world a better place? But I think sometimes we slip from having our identity in work, and then we retire. And then our identity becomes, okay, am I going to live in Arizona or Florida? And am I going to golf? Am I going to do pickleball every day? Which, no judgment on pickleball, it's fine. But I don't think you know what your identity is going to be. The other thing that's even worse is sometimes we are burdened, certainly, with losses or health changes, illnesses. And sometimes then our identity becomes the fact that, oh my gosh, I have congestive heart failure. I'm not going to be able to travel or do what I want to do. So it really is a lot about identity. And so you can choose your identity. I mean, I know people who I think of my aunt and your great aunt Arliss. She is 99 years old. And I think her favorite identity would be that I am a great grandma. And just the other day, I saw a picture of her holding her newest great grandchild. It's not about the fact that she's had to decrease her living space, or that she maybe doesn't feel great every day, or that she's dizzy, those kinds of things. It's more about what's my identity as a person in the world who can still serve the world?
Yeah. And maybe outside, if not career, then I would say, and you've experienced this longer than I have, then people might identify as a parent. And so that shifts as well when you now have adult children, right? And they don't need you as much. Like, speak to that, maybe how your identity shifts when you aren't raising children. You have more like friends.
Yeah, absolutely. And I absolutely love having adult children. I love having adult nieces and nephews. But I think this kind of gets into that concept. Maybe we were going to talk about in the future question, but I love the concept of generativity. And I write about that in my book. And it's the idea of investing ourselves. I'm going to read this because I want to get it right.
Yeah, go ahead.
Investing ourselves into forms of life and work that will outlive us. And the first thing you think of certainly is parenting, but we're not all parents. And like you said, those relationships change. So how can you invest in younger people as someone in their third act of life? And I know just the other day, I just had a great experience with one of my friends who happens to be in her 30s. And she came up to me real quickly and she said, Becky, I've been meaning to let you know. She goes, I got into law school and I decided to apply because of that conversation we had at lunch. And you don't know that what the time you spent with those younger people, you don't know what kind of influence you have. And so it's just really finding ways to kind of, it really is wisdom, I guess, that we have. And how do you invest your wisdom in people who are younger than you? And then also, what do you learn by doing that? And so I could tell you this same person, I have learned so much from her, even though she's 30 something. So that's that generativity. It's what do you get from those younger generations?
Yeah, it makes me think of that line about, planting seeds to trees where we won't sit under the shade, right? Like we won't be there for that, but we still invest in that. You have a line similar to this idea that you've said, which I always love, is have a friend in every decade. So you're in your 60s. That means having a friend at 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 70s, 80s, 90s. How have you tried to implement that in your life?
Well, I think for me, it happens really naturally just because I'm very curious and I love meeting new people. But I think it's also great at maybe one time of the year, maybe let's say it's December, you'll make a list. Okay, who's my friend who's under 10? Who's my friend who's a teenager? Who's my friend who's in their 20s? And it's not just being able to say that I know them, but that you really make a point to interact with them, that maybe you plan a coffee or maybe you get them all together at once. I mean, I did a lot of work when I was in geriatric nursing with intergenerational activities. And so I loved planning things with like 3 generations of people. And of course, that often happens in our families. But having said that, sometimes it doesn't because there's so many people now who don't live near their parents or don't live near their grandparents. So you really have to be intentional to interact with those other decades. And it's just such a rich experience. I'd really encourage people to do that inventory.
Yeah, I love that. I remember, college is a great experience in many ways to mature and to grow up in a very safe environment. But I remember that was always one of the weird parts, I thought, was you never saw old people or young people
or children
on a college campus. It was just sort of this middle-age third that never quite felt like the real life. But I think that also makes me think of the internet, which does amazing things to connect us globally, but also in some ways disconnect us, physically from maybe making the effort to organize an event like that or to bring people together. We can get kind of lazy by just having a FaceTime call or a direct message, maybe.
Yeah, and I think it's easy to sort of get in kind of a group think when you're only talking to other people who are of your age group. I mean, our age group is just as much to blame for that as any age group. So to really be intentional about bringing up, getting together, but then also having some serious conversations. I think what I love is learning from my kids maybe some concept that I've never even heard of before. And doesn't mean that I have to assume that as part of me, but just to learn about it.
Yeah. Be curious. Yeah. So tell me about the name of the book, because you talked about it, but I want to give you a chance to explain what turning means exactly, and why is it something that we should consider, maybe regardless of our age?
Yes, thanks. It was hard to name a book, but turning came to me because I was turning 60. But I love the concept of posture, and I've maybe told you already, or this, that I take ballet, and I love my ballet because it gives me good posture. I think that's important at any age to have good posture and to prevent falls. But there can be kind of a more ethereal posture. And that's how do you look at the world? Do you look at it kind of turned in on yourself and you're just kind of navel gazer, for lack of a better phrase? Or are you looking out and up to what the world needs? And in my faith tradition, it's looking up and hearing what God is telling me to do or directing me to what person or whatever. So turning can be turning for your birthday, or turning in a where you look, where are your eyes, right?
Very cool.
And then I really like the magic and mystery of more days. And I think the word magic, I think can sort of dispel some of that fear about, oh my gosh, I'm just going to be old and decrepit and life's going to be bad. No, some really magical things can happen. And I talked in my TEDx talk about my father-in-law who built a boat from scratch when he was 76, 77, 78. Those summers, he had some plans and he built it. Of course, like on the top of a mountain where there's not even a lake, but that's kind of funny. So anyway, when I interviewed him for the book, he said, Becky, you might be surprised by this, but those summers I worked on the boat when I was 76, 77, 78 were the best summers of my life.
Oof.
And who of you, especially like at your age, would think that oh gosh, I guess I can relax a little bit. I
Yeah.
might have my best
Yeah.
summer when I'm 76,
Yeah.
so I love that. So to me, that's magic. That's magic that can happen when you're that age. Of course, he made the magic happen. He
Totally.
he decided, well, I guess I'll try to do this. And then the mystery, I think there's so much mystery that comes with just how your body changes in body, mind, and spirit. And I think you become more open. I think you can become more curious. You just have to I think you get to a point where you just kind of let go of some of those burdens and barriers that you carried around for like way too long. I have a whole chapter on forgiveness, which I think is very powerful. Um, so yeah, I really like and then more days, I knew I couldn't put aging in the title because nobody would read it. So I came up with the concept of more days, which is kind of code for aging.
Well, and it might be targeted at a certain person, but you said regardless of what decade, you can certainly get something out of it. I mean, I think that story about Bob's boat hits a lot of the points we've talked. It's curiosity, it's sort of mindset, it's deciding that at 76, I still can build a boat, which is pretty crazy, but he chose to do that and then followed through. There's some discipline, some determination there. And my guess he would probably say it wasn't about him either. I'm sure it was for maybe other people to someday enjoy it, or just the journey of building it.
Yeah, absolutely. But that's kind of how he lived his life. And so I would consider him one of my role models of aging. And I think if we're talking about, why, how one person might have some particular view of aging, I think so much of it has to do with who are the role models in your life. So I hope people are finding those, even if they're not maybe in their family tree, find them somewhere else.
When I first started this podcast, the reason I called it Leadmore was kind of the idea of like, who is your Mount Rushmore of leaders? So in that same vein, who would you say are sort of your Mount Rushmore of aging, maybe, or the role models?
Oh my gosh, that's such a fun question. So, who popped in my head first was Dr. Joyce Nelson. She was one of my nursing professors.
Yeah, she's on the book.
And yes, she's fantastic. I love her. And then I would say my Aunt Arliss, who's 99 and going strong. I would say both. So if you can have like Bob and Barb, my mother-in-laws, as one face, which probably fits, you could do that. And then I guess I would say my dad, your Grandpa Jewel. I think he was a great role model for aging, or really just for life in general. Yeah.
Cool. So I pulled out a passage that I really liked, and you sort of talked about it there when you talked about the name of the book, but I'm going to read it too. You said, I think there's a tendency today to make ourselves our own project, and it's easy to fall into that. But we always have a better day, the days that we look out and up rather than down and in. And so you've touched on that, but the part that stood out to me was making ourselves our own project. I think it's just really hard. I feel that at 39, where I'm supposed to like be driving my career, be a great dad, a great husband, we're often sort of stacking ourselves up and seeing how we measure or compare. And it's just it's a lot about me, right? And not about other people.
Yeah.
And so tell me how do you kind of recenter or maybe reorient our direction out and up?
Yeah, it's hard because I think, especially in the culture that we're in, I mean, I think you have this fierce individualism, and I think it's makes sense to most people to think about yourself first, But I think a lot of this really comes from my my faith perspective, is that um, you know think of other people, serve your neighbor, kind of thing, and the golden rule, right? And I just, one thing about this book, so I've had this book since I turned 60, and now I'm 65, and I didn't realize how much I would use the book as kind of a field guide to my life. And I feel like I have lived in and through this book and through my readers for the last 5 years. And so I would say that I'm just really happy right now. And I think a lot of that happy is coming from that change of looking out and up and not thinking about myself so much. So I think sometimes you just have to, it's kind of a risk, right? Of not maybe tending to your own needs or your own goals, and really just being willing to kind of veer off that occasionally to listen to, what your neighbor needs. And who knows what might happen. Oftentimes I use the example of having our exchange student, Toby, come from Germany. And I was really thinking of myself when I had him come, because he supposedly was a tennis player. And I thought he would really help my son's tennis team, win the ESD conference title. Well, as soon as he got here, he told me, he goes, "Oh, Becky, I actually want to play football."
America.
So that's what he did. I let him play football. I schlepped into football practice, everything. So, it turned out to be, what did he need, not what did I need.
Yeah.
And I think, it's really easy for us to become our own project. And it's kind of so, especially related to aging and physical exercise and all of that. And all that's fine to stay healthy. But you got to have a little bigger perspective on that.
Yeah. And that makes me think of sort of, like you said, whether it be faith or karma or sort of energy, even luck. I believe you can kind of create your own luck, but often that comes by helping others, serving others first, maybe not knowing how it'll come back and help you,
Absolutely.
And not viewing relationships as transactional, but give, and eventually it'll return tenfold.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of.
Mm-hmm. I am all about self-care, and you need to, there are people who just give to the point of exhaustion, and so, you do want to take care of yourself in body, mind, and spirit. But I think the real richness of life comes when you're looking beyond yourself.
So, you mentioned, I imagine when you write the book, these concepts just become so burned into your mind and your spirit. And so you talked about how it sort of served as a field guide. Maybe share a story of someone who came up to you or emailed you, who really felt like this book sort of hit them in a certain way that maybe they feel changed because of reading Turning.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. There's been a lot of different stories because I go out to book clubs and I get to hear things that they've decided to do because they've read the book. But the one that I think hit me the most was kind of early on. I would go to kind of this little shipping small business, just not too far from here. And I would bring my books in if I was going to send them to someone. And the gentleman who owns the store was always a little bit grumpy, but he kind of was curious about the book. So I told him a little bit, and I said, "Hey, how about if I give you a book and you give me some free shipping?" I love bartering. It's maybe not legal, but I did it. So anyway, he said, "Sure." So I gave him the book, and he had already kind of shared about that he was kind of on the outs with his dad, or had been for several years. And all I said when I slid the book across the counter, I said, "Read that chapter on forgiveness." He goes, "Okay." So then I come back like a week later with more books to mail, and he goes, "Hey, I read that chapter on forgiveness, and I called my dad, and we're going to get together."
Mm-hmm. Cool.
So I was like, oh my gosh. That's it right there. That's all I needed. I needed that one person to have that kind of powerful impact from the book, and it makes you want to keep writing.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. Well, I had to ask you, this is a little bit off the book topic, but you mentioned your dad, my grandpa Jewel, who's certainly somebody who my wife likes to joke sometimes has become larger than life post-life because of the stories that we tell about him. And maybe that's what we all want in our own life, just to be, remembered in some way. But you, I think, coined this term that he would say these things we call Jewelisms, which are, sort of turns of phrases or little remarks, little quips that help us remember him. And I think there's something to be said about a Midwest farmer seems to have a ton of these too. So he's certainly not the only one, but I wanted to ask you, what's your favorite or a couple favorite dualisms and what do they mean to you?
I want to hear yours too, but
Well, I always think that's the next book we should co-author is like all of the dualisms together and figure out what the lessons are.
exactly. Yeah. One that's been rolling around in my head more recently is you can't live on candy. Do you remember that one?
Yeah, feels pretty relevant right now with my girls.
Well, yeah, literally, you can't live on candy. But I think that because I've told that to some people and they go, what? Like, what's that mean? And to me, it's like you can't live the sweet life all the time. I mean, life can't just be sugar and fun and happiness, and so, you got to work, obviously, but you'll have some hard knocks, and so that's what makes a life. That's what makes an interesting life. It's kind of the ups and downs. So that one is a good one. The other one that I often hear in my head, which I think I would always remind my children of, is he'd always say, can't, never done nothing. So, which is terrible grammar. And my mom was an English teacher, but can't, never done nothing. And so I think anytime he heard us say, I can't do that, I can't do it. So, he was very much, try, just go, yeah.
Which reminds me of like, if you want to dance, you got to pay the fiddler. Like there's sort of a theme there of sort of paying your dues or paying your cost. But then at the same time, the one I always remember is his, let's go do something even if it's wrong, right? Like,
I'm sure he's a teenager. He thought, hey, that's awesome, but no, that was how he lived his life. And maybe that was part of why I thought, sure, I can write a book when I'm 60, yeah.
I mean, I think that's the thread through this book or podcast for me is this mindset of the embracing the can and sort of eliminating the can't and letting yourself do it. So that maybe even one person, the guy in the shipping place, is better because it doesn't mean that it'll be a top 10 New York Times bestseller. Maybe not. But like, that doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. Right.
Exactly. Yeah.
I love that. Very cool. Well, is this, you sort of embodied this book, I think, by becoming an author after being a nurse and a mother and all the other labels. Is there another book in the future, or do you write? I know you journal a lot,
yeah.
right?
Yeah, I would like to challenge myself. Now it's already December. Is it the 1st or it's the 2nd today, right? I was going to challenge myself to write, because I signed up for Substack, and I told myself I was going to write on Substack every day of December, but it hasn't happened yet. So that's a problem. I'm not as disciplined as you are. Okay, so now I already forgot the question.
As your continual practice as a writer, is that
another book. Another book.
Yeah, do you think so?
Yeah. So I'm already half through the next book.
Okay.
And the next book is a memoir of my great honor of meeting a gentleman named Ed. And so that was a couple years ago. So I'm still working at it, but it's just going to have a lot of wonderful themes. It's going to be called No Room for Fairy Tales, which is his own quote. And he was he reminded me a lot of my dad. He was a World War II veteran. But a lot of the story is about the love he shared between he and his second wife, Rose. And so it'll go a little bit into this concept of old love, which I am also very intrigued with. So look forward to that.
Cool. So like connects to you probably in a way that's different than it does to him, obviously, but like still threads with your first book, but also a different challenge, I'm guessing, for yourself as an author to hear someone else's story and capture that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so I haven't specifically written a memoir before. I've done bits and pieces in that family cookbook. And then even in this book, I tell a lot of people's stories. But I have it all on my iPhone. I recorded every conversation with him. And he's so rich in the way he uses words and pictures and dialogue. And so I'm trying to figure out the blend of transcribing his exact words, but then also kind of putting my take on it. And so, I met with him every Tuesday afternoon at the Center for Active Generation. So, it kind of begs that question of, oh, is this another Tuesdays with Maury? It is kind of like that. Yeah, only it'd be Tuesdays with Ed.
Well, this is a sidebar, but I'll send you. I actually I can't vouch for it yet, but I just purchased. It's a AI tool that lets you. It's like at the old school. My dad used to dictate his orthodontic cases, but you can speak into it and it'll transcribe all that just immediately into your computer. So maybe that'll save you a little bit of writing. You can,
send it on. That's awesome.
Awesome. Well, I certainly consider you one of those people on my Mount Rushmore, and I'm inspired by you just deciding to become an author, later in life, and continue to watch your turning journey from 60 to 70 and beyond. So the last question I always like to ask all guests on the Leadmore podcast is, what is your superpower, the thing that you think you do best?
I think in the last few years, I've decided my superpower is words. And that's not exactly a verb, but I'm going to use it as a verb. It's just using words, whether it is written or spoken. And I'm not afraid to use words.
Cool. Well, that makes a lot of sense, I think, with knowing both your parents. I never got to meet your mother, my grandma, but I know that she had a way of words, and certainly Grandpa did. So thanks for sharing that with the world.
Yes. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, so glad to have you, Becky. Thanks. And if somebody wants to get a copy of the book, where should we send them?
It's on Amazon, so they can go there. But if they'd rather buy it locally, the Dunn Brothers Coffee Shop has it. And so it makes a great gift, or just really for any age.
And as you get your Substack written, if you Google Becky Blue, I suppose we could find your Substack and subscribe.
Yes. It's been there rather empty for several months.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks, John. Take care.
All right, friends. Thank you for tuning in to the Leadmore podcast. Thank you to Becky for spending us time and sharing her words with us. Clearly, her superpower, as you can tell. And thank you to you for listening to the Leadmore podcast. Remember, you can catch the Leadmore podcast wherever you listen to your favorite podcast, Spotify, Apple. Click subscribe, leave us a review. And we're also on video format too. If you want to see myself, see Becky, see whoever is on the show, go to youtube.com/JohnTMeyer_, and you can click subscribe. I have the goal of getting to 1,000 subscribers here at the end of 2024. We are so close. We're in the 800s. We're going to make a final push, see if we can make that. So check that out as well. And just thanks so much for listening. Kudos to you for being here, investing in yourself. Like I said, we need more leaders, and now is the time for you to step up. So as always, leaders, take care and be well.